I think this goes back to not waiting for opportunities to happen, but actually creating your own disruptive detours when you see something in your heart that you want to do. But again, just a really important moment for me around courage. I could have very happily stayed on that trajectory in telecommunications, had a wonderful life, but I decided to take this detour, and this disruptive detour changed my entire life. And it's given me the most extraordinary last 20 years.
There are many guests I look forward to bringing you on Graduate Edge, people I've met throughout my own life and career and through our business development beyond learning. Today's guest, Jean Oelwang, is someone I've been looking forward to hosting for a long time. Let me take you back a little bit. In 2018, I was in New York City the week of the UN General Assembly for a 3-day workshop with Virgin Unite. We were working together to support 15 incredible young leaders from around the world to collaborate on social and environmental issues that they were working on in their own lives, in their own countries. Apart from the wonderful and often challenging job at hand that week, some of the people who came through the room that week to support the project were names many would only otherwise maybe read about. For example, Malala Yousafzai dropped in. Daniel Craig just sort of called by. And at breakfast on the final morning, I sat next to a member of the Rockefeller family responsible for their not-for-profit activities, all there to support Virgin Unite's efforts to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. It was a very different circle of people to listen to, learn from, and contribute to as well. One of the people I met that week was Jean Oelwang, president and co-founder of Virgin Unite. Jean and I ended up in a yellow New York taxi together, winding our way through thick lunchtime Manhattan traffic. We both had external meetings at one point, and we were trying to get to those meetings, and we used it as a chance to connect. Ever since that taxi ride, I've done whatever I can to support Jean and the incredible work of Virgin Unite. And I've been invited into some incredible rooms and spaces to listen and contribute since. It's great to have Jean on the podcast today, and she has her own story of sitting in a different taxi that set her on a path as well. Jean shares stories and advice spanning both the corporate world and the not-for-profit sectors. It's a unique perspective, very human stories of walking through doors that most people, I think, maybe would not even realize were open. She spent the last 20 years leading Virgin Unite, partnering closely with Richard Branson to build some of the world's most ambitious change initiatives. We're talking about the Elders, a group that included Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and other global leaders working for peace and human rights. The B Team, a group of incredible business leaders reimagining how business can serve people and the planet, and many other collectives bringing together extraordinary people to tackle humanity's biggest challenges. For me, what makes Jean's story powerful is that none of this was supposed to happen. And Jean opens up about her perspectives, realizations, and advice for those early in their career. She talks about the value of disruptive detours in your career, and I can't wait to dive in to those. We also dig into how to recognize fleeting windows of opportunity and walk through them, how to surround yourself with people who challenge you to be your best self, not just your comfortable self, and perhaps most importantly, how to have the courage early in your career to take some of those leaps. If you've ever felt like you should wait for the right time to do something different, to make a move, or wondered whether you're surrounding yourself with the right people, or question whether that different, maybe unconventional opportunity that everyone thinks is a bit crazy is worth the risk, or maybe you've wondered or considered about getting involved in the not-for-profit sector, maybe on the side of your existing job, or even as a career move. There is so much in this episode for everyone. Welcome to Graduate Edge. Jean, take me back to coming out of university. I think you were at Penn State in the United States. When you came out of university, what did you do? What sort of work did you get into, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, and firstly, just thanks, Josh, for all the incredible work you're doing right now. It's an honor to be here with you today. When I came out of university, I had this opportunity that was with an incredible telecommunications company called GTE. But the reason that I went there is because they had this learning program where I got to work in 3 different parts of the company. It was called the Associate Development Program. And I really wanted to do that because I wanted to understand where my skills fit, what I enjoyed, what I love. So I was really fortunate to have that opportunity to go into this company and to kind of try 3 different areas of marketing and communications.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in that a lot of early talent programs these days move people throughout different parts of the company. And at some point in that journey, you decided to take a year out to volunteer. Is that right?
Yeah, because I love my job with GTE, and I loved, telecommunications and getting the exposure to manufacturing of telecommunications, mobile phones, etcetera. But I always had this, thing in my heart that I always wanted to do something in the not-for-profit sector. I'll never forget going to my boss and saying, "I wanna join." It's called Vista in the United States, where you basically volunteer for a year. I volunteered in a place called Neon Street, which was in Center City, Chicago, working with homeless teenagers. And I'll never forget the reaction I got, not just from my boss, but from my family, from my friends. I think I'd been in telco working for about 3 or 4 years, and they were like, "No, you're going to blow up your career. Don't do it." I remember pausing and listening to everyone's advice, but I made my own personal decision that I wanted to have that experience. And I guess I call it a disruptive detour. And I've done many of those in my life where I've done something that pivots into a different direction. And I'm so glad looking back on it that I did that early in my career because landing in Neon Street changed me completely as a human being. I always talk about how the best education I ever got was that year because these kids who, ranged in age from 13 to 19, had been living on the streets, many of them for years. And they were like a mirror to me that taught me so much about myself and who I was, who I wanted to be. But I think the most important thing is I realized how broken society was that we were letting teenagers as young as 13 live on the street because these kids were falling through the cracks. And I think what that inspired in me that year is I left there thinking, that we need to fix this. We need to fix how government and not for profit and business start working together so we don't have these 13-year-olds living on the streets. But mostly I learned from the teenagers. It was just probably one of the most fulfilling, impactful years I've had in my life.
Wow. I find it inspiring that you went and did that so early in your career. It's common. I don't know if it's common, but it's maybe more likely that someone might take a break from their career, 10 years in or mid-career or go on a sabbatical. If it's done, it's often done a little bit later. So to go and do that early, I find absolutely inspiring. And as you say, it's obviously shaped you. What sort of things were you doing when you say volunteering with homeless teenagers? Paint a little bit of a picture.
Yeah, and just I will do that, but just to your point about early in your career, everyone that's listening to this right now, I'd encourage them to think about that early in your career because it's a lot easier to do early in your career. It actually made me, I think, more interesting to employers after I did this because I had the telco, plus I had this experience. And what I was doing for Neon Street was running their volunteer program and helping to run with the volunteers the day center. So we had a day center where we had about anywhere from 60 to 100 kids come in every day, and we would help them, whether that was just simply getting housing or simply getting clothes on their back or getting a warm meal. And then we'd also help them to get out of their situation. So help build a path, whether that was going back to school or whether that was getting into work. It was this amazing group of about, we had hundreds of volunteers and they would man the front desk. They'd help cook in the kitchen. They would, again, take kids to interview at a university if they wanted to go to university. So it was this extraordinary diversity of thinking as well that I'd never been exposed to in my life. Because I had grown up, I had amazing parents. They didn't have much money, but they gave us this amazing life. And then I was in this situation where suddenly I was seeing these kids that had absolutely nothing. For me, just understanding what they went through, watching the volunteers that came who were also from really diverse backgrounds, it just taught me a lot about that life wasn't my little suburban bubble and that there was this whole world out there that I needed to better understand no matter what I was gonna do in life, and it taught me a lot about empathy, it taught me a lot about listening, and it taught me a lot about humility because they told me exactly what they thought about me all the time, which often wasn't pleasant, and it was just really good to have that mirror.
I was just going to say, you've taken the words out of my mouth. You make the point that actually doing something like that, or taking a year out to do something different, a disruptive detour early in your career is so valuable and makes you more interesting to employers afterwards. I wondered actually whether some of the skills you took and the capabilities you took from that included empathy and the ability to maybe, tell me if I'm wrong, but maybe the ability to connect with people different to you as well. And these are all skills that are so valuable in life, I think, and therefore in your professional career. I mean, would you agree with that?
100%. It changed me as a human being. Even the skills that I got in running this large scale volunteer program, I wouldn't have gotten that anywhere else in the world if I
No.
hadn't gone there. So they desperately needed people, just hands-on, so they wouldn't have given me as much responsibility that early in my career. So I think those skills, but you're spot on that the skills around empathy, around listening, and also how to deal with conflict. Because as you can imagine, these kids didn't have it easy at all in their lives. So it was a lot of conflict dealing with how do you get them on the right path after, this teenager had been in a situation maybe where they had not been loved. They had gone through extreme violence. And so how you deal with that friction it was a big learning lesson for me and how to get them to a positive space. And just the things that I was exposed to that I never would have been exposed to in another environment. It helped me later a lot in the corporate world because when I did bump into friction, it seemed very minor to me compared to what I saw this child going through, so it put it on perspective, I guess, as well, a framing of perspective that was different than my, suburban life before that.
And so you went back into the corporate world and back into telecos and then had this seemingly amazing run of launching telecommunications businesses in emerging markets. My research says places like South Africa, Colombia, Singapore, Australia, Hong Kong. So you're still, I guess, in your 20s, reasonably early in your career, having this no doubt very challenging, busy experience in the corporate world, definitely bringing some of those skills from Neon Street with you. Tell me a little bit about that. Was that what you wanted to do? What led you into that, into that work?
Yeah, I think, what led me back into that work is after Neon Street, I also realized that I needed to get more skills in a business environment, a business
Right.
capacity, and that was gonna be important to me. And I also, coupled with that, really wanted to experience other countries and other cultures. And so this job that I went to after Neon Street in London with Cable and Wireless allowed me to work around the world. And I just loved going into a company, helping start it up, bringing in people from that local community to work there, and then going to the next one and doing the same thing because I learned a ton from that as well, just from radically different cultures, whether it was Bulgaria to Colombia to South Africa. But also what I was seeing, which was the nugget that I think I learned at Neon Street, is I was seeing the same social and environmental problems.
Right.
And we were starting these businesses up. Every market we went into, we had a formula. We went in, we started them up. But there wasn't anything like that looking at the same social and environmental problems on a global scale. So again, I became obsessed with how do you get sectors together, start solving these problems.
It's all starting to make sense, Gene. We've known each other for for a little while now, and you've just said startup 6 or 8 times in the past few minutes. There's obviously a thread now building in your career in terms of what you end up doing on the non-profit side in a startup style, which we're going to explore shortly. Before we do, while you're having this experience and, no doubt kicking goals in a sort of corporate professional sense, but being exposed and seeing the same sort of social and other issues in the countries that you're working in and visiting, interested to know what was a belief you held about yourself at that point that helped you in your career, do you think?
Yeah, I think there was a couple beliefs. One was I realized how little I knew more and more every time I took on a new role, and that I wanted to be curious and learn as much as I could and absorb as much as I could when I had these opportunities. I think the other thing that's interesting, Josh, is like I came from parents that had very little means. And so my parents really wanted to push me on this trajectory of you have to get into a company and you have to work there for 30, 40 years and work yourself up the ladder. And I think I came from a time when it was strange to have a career that was not straight line. And so I guess I would urge people, and I think the belief that I came to find about myself is that to take the courage to take that leap, to take on something new, every time I did that, whether that was going to Neon Street or whether that was saying, hey, yes, I will go to Bulgaria and start a mobile phone company, or hey, I will go to Colombia. And I took that invitation to what may seem crazy to other people at the time if they're thinking in a straight line direction. But I think that kind of disruptive detour slash crooked line actually helped me build a more broad based background and foundation that helped me each time I went into a new role. So I think I would say, in answer to your question, it was probably having that courage and that belief in yourself that you could try something. And if it doesn't work, that's okay too, to pivot into something else and that you don't have to just stay in that straight line. Sometimes that straight line is going to be perfect for you. Like there's many people that'll be listening to this and that straight line will be the exact thing they need to do and they will love it. But if you don't feel like that, then it's okay to try something new and it's okay to fail. It's okay not to necessarily for it to work out perfectly as you dreamt. But I think if you go into it with that open heart and that open mind, you will learn a ton, even if it doesn't work out. And you can take that into the next thing and the next thing.
Amazing. As someone said on a previous episode, actually, there are very few decisions early in your career that you can't reverse.
Yeah, it's a beautiful framing for it.
What a great philosophy. Say
Yeah.
yes, do it. If it doesn't work, just turn around and walk back out of the room again.
And the other thing is they don't have to do it in their career only. They could be starting their job and doing something volunteering on the side.
Right.
So, like, just I think opening your heart and mind to what you're going to learn, be like a sponge in those early years and really talk to a lot of people. And I think that's the other thing that I would say is what I learned from myself is building those deep connections and relationships around you is what will give you that trampoline that you'll either help you fly or if you don't fly, they'll be there to catch you. And I think we don't think when we're coming, even when we're in university, we don't think enough about building those relationships around us that are going to help us be the best version of ourselves. You know, we may select a friend because they're fun or, they're successful and I'd urge people to step back and think about who you surround yourself with that's going to challenge you in a gentle, beautiful way that's going to help stretch you into that person you can be. Because when you come out of university, if you don't have those people around you, maybe you'll get lucky and you'll find some mentors and bosses that'll be brilliant and help instill that in you. But if you don't, you may be pulled down and never realize your full potential and your full capacity to be an extraordinary human being. And so I think building that network and circle around you, not just to help you get the next job, but to help you be the person that you want to be in the world is really important.
There's an idea I think you and I have talked about in the past, actually, that the next 5 to 10 years of your life will be largely influenced by the people you meet and the books you read. And
Yeah.
it goes to that idea of proximity and who you have in your environment, who you put into your environment, or what environments you put yourself into, and who's in that environment. Because those two things, the people around you and the information, books around you, shape you massively. And I think what you're talking about there in terms of being proactive about that is gold dust. Speaking of which, you find yourself quite senior at I think it was Virgin Mobile in Australia, and there's an intersection with one of the people that you've gone on and built a great partnership with over the years since in Richard Branson. And an opportunity arises for you to leave the corporate world and make that leap across to the not for profit world after it sounds like years of noticing, observing, talking about, learning about some of the biggest problems in the world. Tell me a little bit about how that leap happens. How does that come about? And then I'd love to explore some of the amazing work that you've done with Virgin Unite and what people can learn and take from that. But take us back to how that moment came about.
Yeah, so I had a great job in Australia working for Virgin Mobile, and we launched the business, and it was just fantastic, fantastic group of people. But there was something still gnawing in me, wanting to look at, how do you take a brand, how do you take a company like Virgin to really make impact in the world? And so I think this goes back to not waiting for opportunities to happen, but actually creating your own disruptive detours when you see something in your heart that you want to do. And I then overheard Richard, who was my boss at the time, but he never came to any of our board meetings, but he did come to Australia a lot. So I remember being in a car with him traveling in Sydney and overhearing him talking about wanting to do something more with the Virgin brand and have impact and do something more in the charitable space. And so I took that nugget of information and went home and just called one of my board members, amazing guy, Gordon McCullum, and I said, "Hey, Gordon, I overheard Richard talking about this. I love my job, but I would really like to do something in this area. Would you be supportive?" And he was amazing. And that's, again, something I think we can learn from these great leaders about helping nurture others into their dreams. He was like, "Sure." He said, "Go ahead and put a plan together. I'll help you get it to Richard." And so I went home that night and I put a plan together about what I thought Virgin could do in the impact space, in the not-for-profit space, and then sent that to Richard. And then, like a week later, got a phone call from him. And I'll never forget standing in my house, my little house in Roselle, and he was on the phone and he's like, "I got your plan." He's like, "I love it. Let's do it." I literally nearly dropped the phone. I was so excited, Josh, to bring this to reality. So yeah, so then I found a replacement at the time. I was joint CEO of Virgin Mobile with this other amazing guy, and that was also a beautiful learning experience to have a joint CEO role and helped both of us, I think. And so I found a replacement and then I headed to London to start Virgin Unite. But again, just a really important moment for me around courage, around
Yeah.
I love my job. Like, it wasn't like I was unhappy, but I knew there was something else that I needed to do in this world. And it's almost like a calling for me. And I could have stifled that calling, and I could have very happily in my life stayed on that trajectory in telecommunications, had a wonderful life, but I just decided to take this detour, and this disruptive detour changed my entire life again. And it's given me the most extraordinary last 20 years.
I mean, it certainly has, and it's how we've come to know each other as well. Let's just pause on that moment. I wonder what advice you would have for people early in their careers around seizing the opportunity, sort of seizing the moment. Like you said, you could have thought, "Oh, I was just in a car with Richard Branson, and he mentioned wanting to do something in the charitable space. Well, that's interesting. I want to do something in the charitable space one day, but oh well." Just gone back to your job. I wonder what advice you would have, but I'm also interested to hear from you. How did you feel putting that plan together and getting your board member to help you get it to Richard Branson? What was going through your mind? How did it feel for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was scary. It was scary because I'm thinking, I'm going to put this plan together. I could lose my great job if they know this is something I want to do,
Right.
and acknowledging that I'm taking that risk. But it was also it was almost just as if I couldn't stop doing it. Like, it was something that was just pulling me. And I think, again, for young people that are out there listening to this right now, there's going to be these moments in your life where you're going to have these opportunities, these moments or these windows. And if you don't walk through them and give them a go, they may not be there 3 years later. So it's so important, I think, to not just live in the status quo and live in a comfort bubble. I think it's so important to think about how do you step out of that comfort bubble and try new things. And it doesn't have to be as radical as I did in terms of doing a new job. It could be something in your job. It could be something that you see, okay, this isn't working for the company. This is something that I could go to someone with an idea to change and shape that idea and bring it to them and look at how I could help bring it to life. And that may create an entire interesting trajectory for you, or it may not. But I think what you don't want to do in life is miss these windows and these doors. And, again, sometimes you're going to walk through that door and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this was not the right door. And I've done that before too. And I've stayed in that other room at that other table, I think, for too long sometimes. And again, I think the longer you stay in something where you're unhappy, the harder it's gonna be to get out of it and to have that courage that you build up, because when you're in a situation where you're not satisfied, you're not happy, you're also losing self-confidence. And, if you don't go through new doors or try new opportunities, then it's gonna be harder and harder as you progress in your career.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's incredibly valuable, relevant advice for us all, actually, at any point in our careers, I think, but particularly early on. Tell us a little bit about the work you've been able to do over the last 20 years in leading Virgin Unite and wonderful initiatives like the Elders, the B Team, 100% Human. Richard speaks, I think, very highly of what you've been able to lead over the last 20 years in tackling some of the world's biggest problems and doing it with such humility and grace and partnership and collaboration. Tell us a little bit about those main projects and some of the moments in putting those projects together that have really meant a lot to you.
Yeah, and obviously you and I bonded on the 100% Human at Work one, which you gave a lot of time to as well, getting it off the ground. And that one, I just am so passionate about how we put humanity back at the center of companies, because I think we've strangled that out of companies in many cases. And over the years, and again, when I say this, I'll say we, because that was the thing that I learned, again, as I mentioned very early on at Neon Street, is surrounding yourself with those people and then getting the right people together and building something extraordinary. There's nothing more exciting than that. When you bring together the right people, diverse skill sets, diverse thinking, they bring a massive set of wisdom in. When you're bringing that together, you're just exponentially learning from those people. And so over the years, we built, I think it's 22 collectives of leaders. As you mentioned, the Elders, which is a group of global leaders that came together to work on behalf of humanity for peace and human rights. The B Team that came together to look at how we could create a better way of doing business for people on the planet. The Planetary Guardians, which is our most recent one, looking at how do we thrive within planetary boundaries as humanity. And the list goes on of different types of them. But the commonality was the extraordinary people that came together to co-create and build them. There is nothing that we have done on our own over the last 20 plus years. And when I look back on these last 20 some years of building these, the thing that was most meaningful were the deep connections that we built with these people over the years. For example, the Elders was the very first one we built with Nelson Mandela and Graça Machel, Archbishop Tutu. And what's been beautiful, Josh, is that group is still together. And I think one of the things that I learned early on is, I put these people on pedestals. They were my heroes.
Yeah.
And I learned early on, A, that they're human, but B, that they became who they were because of each other. And it goes back to that idea of the deep connections and these circle of friends that you build around each other. And I'll never forget a moment with Nelson Mandela. It was in 2013. We brought the Elders to South Africa, and we didn't know it at the time, but he passed later on that year. So it was the last time they were ever going to be together. And I remember sitting around the edges of this amazing table that all the elders were sitting at and just watching them. And there was laughter and tears and love, and it was just extraordinary feeling in the room. You could almost cut that energy of deep friendship. Like it felt so thick and so beautiful in that room. And then I remember at the end of the lunch, Mandela, who was well into his 90s at that stage, stood up and he gently slid his left hand into his amazing wife Grace's hand, and they gently turned to leave the room. But before he left the room, he turned back and looked at this extraordinary group of friends, and his smile and his eyes lit up the entire room as if to say, "You've got this. You've got this now." And then he gently turned and walked out of the room. And just that importance of, he literally passed maybe 6 months later after that. But just he held that space and that love and that group of friends, knowing that his legacy was going to be alive forever through that group of friends and through the other friends and circles that they would create. So I share that story because, again, it goes back to that idea of thinking about who you surround yourself with. Who are those deep connections? Who are those friends that are going to bring you that joy and that love, that are going to be those mirrors to you about who you are in this world, but that are also going to allow you to do incredible things in your life. If you don't surround yourself with those people who will help you create, like, what is the impact you want to leave in the world, you'll always be minimized to what you as an individual can achieve, which could be really beautiful things in this world. But then you're stifling yourself from what you could have done to drive change for other people in the world by limiting who you surround yourself with.
And what an incredible group of souls and individuals, through that project that you were able to be part of and surround yourself with as well. I wonder what you learnt from pulling together the group of, that sort of that group of people. And I wonder what a young person or any person early in their career can do to surround themselves with people who will help them grow, help them be the best version of themselves, and pull people into their environment. I imagine, like a lot of the people listening to this, when you were 22, 25, early on in your career, anywhere in your 20s, you didn't sit and think, oh, one day I'll be sitting in a room with Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Richard Branson, Mary Robinson, Kofi Annan. Like, I'm sure that wasn't, you didn't, maybe you did, Gene, I don't know, but I've known you for a little while. I don't think that was the plan, so to speak, and it's not something everybody has access to. I guess if you like, and you've worked very very hard to have that kind of access. I guess my question is, how can someone early in their career take that, learn from that? What types of things can they do you think, to surround themselves with people who they might not otherwise come in contact with? Maybe there are some heroes, maybe there are some people who someone thinks, oh, gee, I wonder what it would be like to work with or partner with.
And, firstly, I can absolutely guarantee I was not thinking that I was gonna sit at a table with Nelson Mandela when I was which just shows everyone that's listening out there right now, I came
Yeah.
from a super tiny town. Again, my father worked for Sears and Roebuck. We were
Yeah.
nowhere near anywhere I would have imagined in my life that I would have had a chance to sit at the side. And I wanna be very clear, I wasn't sitting at the table. I was sitting around the edges listening. And that's what has been a great gift in my life, is just this extraordinary group. I've learned so much from sitting at their feet.
You've also gone on to meet and talk to and study the partnerships of many great people, many wonderful souls. You mentioned Nelson Mandela and Gracia. You also mentioned, in previous conversation, Desmond and Leah Tutu, um, Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. You've studied these sort of partnerships, and I think there's a wonderful link into the professional world around building partnerships. You've built an incredible partnership with Richard. So if I can add another layer to that question, what have you learnt around partnering and your partnership with Richard that young people can take and really apply to their own careers?
Mm. Yeah, I think a couple things on that. I think I look back when I was just coming out of university in my 20s. I think I wasted a lot of time with people and friends and building friendships with people that perhaps were not making me the best version of myself. And so I think the first thing is to always ask that question of, if you're going to invest time in a friendship, ask that question if they're helping lift you or if they're pushing you down or holding you back. And I think cut those ties from the people that are, and don't waste time, because I look back and that's one thing I feel I perhaps wasted some time. So I think just starting with that and building those people around you. And, you know, as you mentioned, I went out and interviewed like 65 plus people. Many of them I didn't know. And I called them to say, could I have a conversation and learn from you? And so I think maybe two of them said no. And so I think for young people listening to this right now, think about the people you really respect. Because I can almost guarantee you may get some no's, but if you call and say, hey, I just want to talk to you for an hour to learn about how you got where you were, what you did, and have those conversations with people, because who knows where they will lead, and who you will meet that you may build that deep connection with. Also put yourself in places of people that are radically different than you and build those deep connections with them, because they'll challenge you and pull you in a different direction. And so put yourself, whether it's volunteering, whether it's doing something, studying a different course, or even as you're going up your career, Put yourself in those spaces where you're gonna meet unlikely friends, and then really think hard about who you invest time in and build those deep connections.
Yeah, it makes so much sense, doesn't it? It's a wonderful reminder, actually, that you talked about you had some of these people on pedestals, and actually you realized they're just human. They've just had a slightly bit of a different journey, and they have a publicly well-known name, but they're kind of just going about they're just doing their thing, right?
Yeah, they are. They
Yeah.
love people and they love talking with people and getting ideas.
Yeah, the world decided they should be famous. They're just doing their thing, and
Mm,
they actually just want to make connections, and they have the same needs we have, and want to learn as well. When I'm interested to know that in these types of partnerships, and maybe your partnership and relationship with Richard is a good one because you work so closely. Deep connections, really strong relationships, really solid understanding of each other, common goals, common values, common purpose. How do you go about managing disagreement when it
mm,
happens? Because it happens. How does conflict get managed? Because what we do know about relationships and trust is when relationships are of a certain style and everybody gets on and everything's great, actually trust can be slightly too low and conflict gets swept away, gets swept under
mhm,
the rug. 'Cause you don't want to destabilize the friendship, right? Or the
mm.
working partnership. You don't want to rock the boat. I cannot imagine, Gene, that you have not had conflict and disagreement in tackling some of the world's biggest problems and bringing people together. How do you manage disagreement with Richard, for example? How does that happen?
Yeah, and I think you said something really important when you talked about partnering just now because you talked about shared purpose, shared values.
Yeah.
So I think having that as a North Star helps lift above the petty problems. Like, because you're going to go back to those, this is why we're here, this is what we're doing. But as you rightly said, there's always going to be conflict. You're not going to get rid of conflict. And I think the partnerships that we interviewed, I learned a ton from about how they managed that. They learned how to disagree without being disagreeable. And they did that in lots of different ways so that they could create a safe space so that we could have the conversations. Whether that was they created these rituals of trust, of coming together, so that you're constantly getting to know and deepen your relationships, your deep connections, which helps. I'll never forget the one that Airbnb had that I love, that I always steal from them, which was elephants, dead fish, and vomit. So they used to bring their team together once a month to talk about the elephants in the room that no one's talking about, the dead fish that everyone's talking about doing nothing about, and then the vomit that people just need to get off their shoulders. And they talked about having this ritual help them have those conversations and learned how to have conflict with each other. Another partnership something that I always remember too is to always start with the why. Take a step back and understand why that person is coming from that place and have empathy and understanding. So you're not just closing them off and saying, that's a bad idea. This amazing friendship of two people, Andre and Bertrand, that did solar impulse flight around the world, they used to always call the friction the sparkles because they said they went into it realizing that neither of them was completely right and that if they could get to a third way, it was going to be better than their decision. And they talked a lot about how that it wasn't about them and them winning. It was about them learning and becoming a better person. And Cornell West and Robert George, they are two Americans who could not be more opposed. Cornell West is super far left. Robert George, super far right, and yet they're best friends. And they talked a lot about how I've had opposing views on almost everything, but they said that they used to just deeply listen to each other. People used to think they were in an argument, but they were listening to each other and then quiet because they knew if that person that they respected had that view, they could learn something from them, even if they didn't agree with their full opinion.
By respect.
Underpinned by respect and allowing people to have difference in opinion. Going back to that, like not putting people on a pedestal, allowing them to make mistakes and realizing that those mistakes will build trust. But also it's not about holding things. I remember many of the partnerships that I knew deeply. I knew that they had disagreement and I knew that they had gone through rough times. And when I was interviewing them, I tried to get them to talk about those rough times and they wouldn't do it. And it was almost as if they had had this kind of sacred holding of the partnership that they didn't want to undermine each other. And you could even see that with Ben and Jerry when I interviewed them. There was no body language, no words that undermined the other. Held that sacred space of the partnership.
There's a they under and I see this with you and Richard actually in the few times I've seen you in the same event or room or whatever. There's an obvious deep respect and deep appreciation for each other. And it's almost like we can disagree and argue, but that's behind closed doors and we respect each other's opinion and we'll seek to learn from each other. There's not
Mm,
one's not right, one's not wrong. I love that. It's always looking for the third way. So this is my opinion. This is your opinion. Neither of us are going to be right. Let's find a third. I
mm.
think that's absolutely brilliant. Final question. If we go back and think about 21-year-old Jean coming out of university, what would surprise her about where you are today?
Everything would surprise you. I think that, again, for young people coming out of university and listening, I wish that I'd had more courage even. I wish I had had that belief to do even more when I came out of university. What would surprise her as well is the incredible deep connections and friendships I've built in my life. And I think back then I would never have imagined would have these amazing human beings who I've traveled through life with now, who are there for those times when I've failed. They've been there for those times to celebrate when I've done something that felt good. But mostly they've um they've been this unbelievable bubble of love and made life have meaning. And I think if I could go back to that 21-year-old, I'd say invest in those people as you come along them that are going to build that incredible bubble of love around you. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And that's the most important thing that you should be investing time and investing your life in is building those deep connections around you.
Thank you so much for making the time. I knew it would be great to talk. I'm glad we got to be able to do it.
Thank you, Josh.